Hi, my name is Robin Kay, and I'm going to provide you an overview of EDUC7001G, which is the introductory course in our Doctorate of Education program at Ontario Tech. And it's helpful to look at the course, which is 12 weeks long, in four phases. So the first phase is the foundational inquiry and literature mastery, developing your skills and finding research. The second phase is framing your research, having a problem and getting questions. The third phase is looking a bit at the methodology and your theoretical frameworks. And the final phase is determining the significance of your research, looking ahead at your literature review, and actually presenting your first draft of what you plan to do in your doctoral research. But let's go into these in detail. In week one, we're going to do some introductions and get to know your peers, which is really critical for your success in the program. Your peers will be your number one source for support and uh, guidance and helping you get through the program. Obviously, your supervisor and your teachers will also be very, very important. But I found that getting to know your peers is really critical for success in the program. And then I'll introduce you to generative AI and how it might help as a research partner in this process. We'll then look in week two at finding researchable problems, making sure that they can be answered, that they're not too big, and that you have a data source where you can actually collect information. And then we'll start to dig in deep about actually finding research, how to find high quality peer reviewed articles, and also organizing that so that you can coordinate and bring together all the ideas and the papers that you find. So that's phase one, foundational skills. Phase two, we're going to start jumping into it. You're going to start moving into your research problem, and there are different sections of an introduction that you're going to write. And so we're going to talk about the introduction, but you're going to do an overview. And that's an overview of your problem. And we're going to focus on that in week four. And then week five, well, in between week four and week five is a mid-semester break. And that'll give you some time to look at the background and rationale. So here's the problem, but perhaps more importantly is why does it need to be looked at? What's going to drive you in the next 3 years with passion to pursue this problem? And once we understand that background and rationale and the problem, we can craft research questions, answerable research questions that we think are important to address perhaps research gaps and the reasons you're doing the research. So that's phase two. Phase three is the methodology. And while you'll be doing methodology in the next term, it's important to think about that and your research design. Are you going to use qualitative methods of interviews, focus groups, or are you going to use quantitative methodologies, for example, surveys? Or you might do a combination, a mixed sort of methods design. So we want to take a look at that briefly, if only to determine if what you're doing is realistic. Do you have the population or the people or the sample to collect data from? You can have this fantastic idea, but if we have no one to collect the data from, or we can't get the data, then we have to circle back and change our research questions. Then we'll look at week 8, which is more theoretical, and we're going to look at the theoretical and conceptual frameworks to ground your study. And it's grounding the study often in the methodology in terms of your approach of how you're going to look at things, what constructs you're going to look at, what specifically are you going to delve into, and what is the theory supporting that. And then we'll look at something you probably haven't considered, which is researcher positionality. Really important. So who are you as an individual, and what are your biases that will influence your data interpretation and analysis? So for example, if you're collecting interview data about the use of generative AI and you're really pro Gen AI, you might see that data and the responses through a specific and somewhat biased lens of pro technology. Could be the same if you were against technology. So we have to state our biases up front, and then ways that we can actually address those biases. So that's phase 3, getting into the home stretch. In phase 4, we're going to look at the significance, which is the final stage of the introduction. So why is this? What's the impact of this research? Once we get the answers, what's it going to do for us in terms of perhaps teaching or policy or administration? Um, it could be affecting student learning. It could be all sorts of things, but we want to establish the significance. And then week 3, we're just going to peek ahead and take a look at the literature review. We're going to do some of that in week 3, and you have to do a fair bit of literature review to establish the scholarly reasons of why you need to do your research. But you're going to have to do a lot more thematic planning and literature review and developing themes in the literature. And so we're going to focus on that. And then finally, we're going to celebrate in week 12 and do a doctoral research colloquium where you're going to share your initial draft of what you want to do with your peers, and they're going to give you some feedback on that. So that's a roadmap to the course, your first course in September.